The Harley's growl rolled over the highway before the bike appeared, a sound deep enough to stir the dust, resting on the gas station roof. Heat clung to the pavement in trembling sheets. The sun was lowering behind the grain silos, spreading bronze light across the cracked concrete of Mike's Gas and Go. The air smelled of diesel, motor oil, and something faintly sweet, like burnt sugar. Tommy crouched in the narrow shade beside the dumpster, his back pressed to its warm metal skin. The wall behind him peeled in white flakes that caught on his shirt. His bedroll, a thin green blanket tied with shoelaces, waited under a piece of cardboard that said, "Fragile." Though nothing about his life was, he had been counting bottles all afternoon. His small reward for invisibility, 1 nickel, 2 nickels, maybe 7.5 if the machines worked and nobody shoved him away. Enough for an egg sandwich wrapped in damp paper. Being invisible was not an accident. It was a job. You woke before the town did, moved, like a ghost, left no footprint. You learned the places that tolerated you, the dumpsters that hid you, the faces that looked through you. Tommy had done that job well, but even good workers slip sometimes. The motorcycle curved into the lot, chrome flashing once before the light died on it. The rider killed the engine and let the silence expand. He swung a leg over the seat with the slow grace of someone who had once been strong and still remembered how strength used to feel. His boots clicked against the concrete. His vest was black leather, worn soft, patches flattened by age and sun. Across the lot, Dale Prescott sat on the tailgate of his pickup, crushing a beer can in his fist. Each squeeze made the aluminum sigh. His brother Kyle leaned against the bed, arms folded like he owned gravity. Chad crouched on the bumper. Ricky chewed a toothpick, and a local boy called Tommy B kicked at gravel because kicking was all he knew how to do. 5 men, full of boredom, and the kind of courage that only exists when there is someone smaller nearby. They had been drinking since noon. The air carried their laughter, sour and heavy, a noise that made strangers stay inside their cars a little longer. Mike, wiping the counter for the 4th time, kept glancing at the window. His face held the weary look of a man who loved a place he could no longer control. The rider walked toward the door. The chime rang its bright false note. Inside, Mike looked up, relief flickering through him like a gust through curtains. The 2 men spoke quietly. Tommy could not hear the words, but he read the rhythm. Coffee, small talk, respect between people who understood silence. The rider moved like someone careful not to waste space. Tommy watched him the way a stray watches a hand that might feed or strike. Something about the man's calm steadiness felt like a story he had once heard and wanted to believe. He tried not to think about the veteran. He tried not to see again that alley 2 months ago, the heavy boots, the sound a body makes when it cannot protect its ribs. He had watched then, pressed against a fence, nails carving half-moons into his palms while he whispered, "Not me. Not now." The man had lived, maybe. Tommy never found out, but the sound stayed, and so did the promise he had made afterward, in a whisper meant only for the night. Next time, do something. The rider stepped back into the sunlight. Steam lifted from his paper cup. Dale's head turned. He nudged Kyle with his elbow and smirked. The others straightened, stretching like dogs, scenting an easy meal. "Look what rolled in," Dale said, loud enough for the words to bounce off the pumps. The rider ignored him. He set the coffee on the seat of the bike, unscrewed the fuel cap, started to fill. The steady glug of gasoline was the only sound. Kyle tipped his chin. "Out-of-towner," Ricky grinned. "Wrong place for leather, friend." The laughter came thin and sharp. It wasn't about humor. It was about territory. The rider said, without turning, "Just passing through. Don't want trouble." His tone was polite. but it carried the quiet weight of a man who had learned to measure threats before breakfast. Tommy saw the space close around him, the small movements that turned open ground into a trap, Dale stepping off the tailgate, Kyle shifting sideways, Chad spitting on the pavement like marking a circle. Tommy felt his stomach pulled tight. He could stay where he was. He could keep his rule. He was good at rules. But rules don't burn like promises do. The light changed. The sun dropped another inch. The golden strip that had hidden him slid away. Now half his face glowed. The other half stayed dark. It looked, he thought, like a line someone had drawn with chalk, a border between the person he had been and the person he might need to be. The writer's voice carried again, calm but firmer. Step back. Gentlemen. Dale's mouth twitched. Gentlemen. Hear that? Boys. He called us gentlemen. The laughter turned rougher. He flicked the crushed can, so it clanged off the pump. You're on our ground. Mike had stopped wiping. Through the glass, Tommy saw his hand hover over the phone. His eyes darted once toward the dumpster, as if searching for help that wasn't supposed to exist. Tommy's pulse counted seconds. 1, 2, 3, each slower than the last. He could already see how this would end. The man bleeding, the 5 of them laughing, the story told wrong for years. He thought of the veteran again, the ribs like sticks under skin, the wheeze. The shame had been heavy then, heavier than hunger. The rider turned slightly, the movement deliberate, not looking for a fight. He said. Dale took a step closer, the soles of his boots rasping on grit. Good, he said. Then you won't mind taking your coffee somewhere else. The rider didn't move. He might have been carved from the same sunburned concrete inside Tommy. Something gave way. The careful walls that kept him safe tilted. A small fury rose from a place he had kept sealed. He hated the sound of their laughter, the lazy certainty of it. He hated how the town looked away. He stepped forward before he had time to change his mind. His shoes made a soft squeak that everyone heard. The space between dumpsters and pumps opened like a stage for a heartbeat. Even the cicadas stopped. Leave him alone, he said. The words were not loud. They were thin, cracked, and trembling, but they were enough to make every head turn. Dale blinked, as if the ground itself had spoken. Then his grin came back, wider, meaner. Well, look at this. The trash talks. Tommy wanted to swallow the fear in his throat and couldn't. His legs shook, but he stayed. The heat was fierce, the kind that made the air shimmer. Sweat rolled behind his ear. He smelled beer, leather, gasoline, and the faint, clean scent of the rider's coffee. Kid, the rider said quietly, not gentle, not pleading, warning. Get out of here. This isn't your fight. Tommy didn't move. The sentence inside him repeated itself. An old prayer turned order. Next time, do something. He shook his head once. 5-on-1 isn't fair. The laughter started again, but it didn't sound the same. There was a flicker in it, a pulse of uncertainty. Dale's eyes narrowed. You got a death wish? He asked. Tommy didn't answer. His voice had already done its work. The rest would belong to movement, to noise, to what comes after a line is crossed. He felt the ground under his sneakers, the rough texture of gravel through worn rubber. The rider had turned fully now, his body angled protectively, though he didn't yet reach for the kid. Mike's hand on the phone froze, then pressed the first number. For a long breath, nothing happened. The wind lifted a napkin across the lot. It fluttered like a pale bird and vanished under a car. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and stopped. Dale's shoulders rolled. He cracked his neck. Should have kept quiet, he said, and the words came out almost bored. He stepped forward. Tommy felt everything slow, as if the world wanted to give him a chance to run, but he didn't. The bright edge of the setting sun climbed up his cheek, burning gold along his jaw. The warmth felt like judgment and mercy, both. He squared his stance. His mouth was dry. His heart beat so loud it filled his ears. Yet under the noise, there was calm, a strange, hard calm that came from choosing something irreversible. "Leave him alone," he said again. This time the words were steady enough to stand on, and the silence that followed was the kind that always comes before the first blow, silence held like a drawn breath. The rider's coffee steamed into the cooling air, a thin, white thread wavering, as if unsure which way the wind would finally turn. Tommy stood inside the seam of his own shadow, the line of sunlight still drawn along his cheek like chalk, and felt the hour tilt toward something it could not tilt away from. Boot soles scraped, Dale's shoulders squared. Kyle's mouth twisted into the half-smile he wore when he expected something ugly to begin. The others shifted almost lazily, closing space without looking like they were closing space. Tommy noticed small things because small things had always warned him first. Kyle's right foot angled to block the narrow path between pump and island. Chad let his weight settle onto the balls of his feet. Ricky clicked the toothpick to the other side of his mouth. Tommy B's eyes skittered toward the street and back again, already rehearsing a story about how he had not really been there. Above them, the red eye of the canopy camera pulsed. On the glossy curve of its metal housing, the lot trembled upside down. A tiny bowl of men and heat and light. The lens did not blink. They do not know Mike's cameras recorded every face at 1647. Tommy did not look up. He did not need to. That tiny glow lived at the edge of his awareness, the way the whine of the soda refrigerator lived there, and the faint tick of cooling engines and the plastic slap of a loose flag against a pole. He knew where it watched from. He had mapped this lot in terror and in boredom. A boy can learn a place better than he learns himself. Behind the glass, Mike let his hand rest flat on the phone. He had dialed before. He knew the cost of asking for help when the troublemakers were local boys, how paperwork fell asleep when names were familiar. Still, he pressed the first number, then the second, then the third. The decision changed his breathing, short and careful, like a person testing the strength of ice they hoped had thickened overnight. The rider angled his body, not enough to invite a strike, enough to keep the boy in the corner of his sight. His voice found Tommy, and no one else. "Son," he said, the word even and heavy with warning. "Back away." Tommy felt the shape of the word in him. He did not know the rider's name. He knew only the steadiness in that tone and the weight it put on the air. Ebenso, he had already given his answer. He let the sentence he had spoken a moment ago settle into the ground under his shoes and become part of the concrete. Leave him alone. He could not gather it back, and he did not want to. Dale's gaze slid to the rider's vest and paused on the patches there. The threadwork clean and quiet. Something in his look sharpened, as if the target glittered more temptingly now that he had named it. "You hear the kid," Dale said, grinning past the rider to his crew. 5 on 1. He can count, Kyle chuckled on cue. "Maybe the hero wants even odds," he said. "We could help with that." Chad's laugh rose and died quick, like a dog's bark, testing a boundary and hitting fence. Heat lifted off the blacktop and kissed the skin under Tommy's jaw. He adjusted his stance an inch, not to look tough, to find balance. He could feel his heartbeat trying to set the tempo for the scene, and he refused to let it. He set his own, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The world shrank to details he could use. The hose draped from the pump to the bike, a black arc that would trip hasty feet. The slick crescent of oil near the gutter, dark as a bruise. The small ladder to the propane exchange that could become a step if a body needed leverage. None of it was enough. All of it mattered. The camera's red light blinked, steady as the pulse in his throat. "Kid," the rider said again. The warning clipped shorter now. Please. Tommy kept his eyes on Dale. You said you do not want trouble, he said to the rider, his voice low, almost conversational. Let me try to make sure you do not get any. For a breath, the absurdity flashed through him. A hungry boy in worn sneakers, offering protection to a man who wore danger like a quiet coat. On a kinder day, the thought might have made him laugh. Not now. His mouth tasted like a penny held too long under the tongue. Dale stepped close enough that Tommy smelled the beer on his breath, the sour, fermenting edge of it. You got a smart mouth for something that sleeps with trash, Dale said. His hand rose slowly, almost curious, and stopped inches from Tommy's face. The pause was the real insult. It said he could take his time and still have everything he wanted. Tommy refused the flinch his body begged for. He fixed on a flaw, the small scratch on the bridge of Dale's nose, a white seam like a badly erased pencil mark. If he watched the eyes, fear lived in him and wanted to obey. If he watched a flaw, he could pretend the man was only a detail. He could survive details. Behind Dale's shoulder, Kyle shifted again. The blocked exit became a wall. On our ground, Dale had said earlier. That was the story that fed them. Tommy wanted to tell a different story, one where ground belonged to whatever decency a person could hold under their feet. The red light blinked again. Mike's lips shaped a word into the phone, a prayer wrapped as a name. Sheriff. His thumb pressed harder into plastic. He had seen enough beginnings to know how they end. Yet he made the call anyway because fear of the system was smaller than fear of doing nothing. The rider's fingers flexed once at his side. An impulse check. He measured the calculus of bodies and angles and chose the only bet that honored a code older than any patch. Patience. Gentlemen, he said, eyes on Dale. You have made your point. Let him be. Dale lowered his hand to Tommy's chest and pushed. Not hard, not enough to bruise, enough to say you are a thing I move. Tommy rocked back and felt the raised lip of a patch where the concrete rose the width of a coin. He caught himself before he could stumble. He breathed once, twice. He did not give Dale the gift of a sound. We got a live one, Ricky said, the toothpick bouncing. Tommy thought of the veteran and wished he did not. He wished he could peel the memory off and lay it in the dumpster and pull the lid shut. But that night had taught him something he could not afford to forget. Guilt weighs more than fear. He felt both now, heavy and clean. Like the pressure before rain, the wind shifted. From the highway came the faraway murmur of a truck. Then silence. The lot returned to its cruel little theater. Look at me, Dale said. Tommy did not. He kept his sight on the scratch. It made Dale a map, and a map is smaller than a man. A buzzing rose in his ears, blood asking for more room. He bent his knees a little, enough to be ready, and not enough to look like a dare. The camera watched, and in its convex skin the whole scene turned miniature and precise. The boy in two big sneakers, the ring of men, the rider's dark vest, the coffee cooling on the seat of the bike, steam thinning to nothing. In the glass door, reflections layered over reflections. For a breath, Tommy saw himself flattened and ghostly, superimposed on bags of chips and Mike's worried face and the gleam of lottery tickets. The image made him look like a thing that could pass through any surface and leave no mark. He remembered the morning Mike had accidentally left an extra sandwich by the back door. How a person can make a mistake so neatly it looks like grace. Dead again. Not the kind with paper, the kind with eyes. The rider took a half step, enough to catch Dale full on. I will walk away, he said, and you will let the boy walk with me. Dale's grin softened in the way mean smiles do when their owners cross into certainty. No, he said, I think we teach lessons here. Mike's voice threaded the air through the barely open door, the sound of a man pushing breath through a keyhole. You need to come, he said. "You need to come now." Tommy felt the decision harden. He did not like its shape and could not change it. He moved an inch forward, not careful, not timid, but clean, as if stepping from one stone to the next, across a shallow creek he had crossed 100 times in a dream. His soul squeaked softly. He found the chalk edge of sunlight and let it burn a line along his jaw. He heard his own breath and believed it. "Leave him," he said, more evenly this time. The steadiness surprised him. It felt borrowed, and he did not care from whom. Kyle cracked his knuckles. A small, obscene punctuation. Chad's shoulders loosened. A predator settling into the coil before the spring. Tommy B's grin widened until it looked nervous. A mask that did not fit the face beneath. The camera's red eyes steadied into a constant glow, as if deciding there would be no need to blink to remember. On the street, a minivan rolled past slow and did not stop. A dog in the back pressed its nose to the glass and fogged a circle there. Behind the station, a metal door clanged, and a bird lifted into the glare and vanished. Dale's hand came up again. Faster now. Tommy's shoulders tightened. He felt the shape of the push before it landed and set his feet for it. He did not know if he could take what was coming. He knew only that he had decided to. "Kid," the rider said, and the one word held a plea and a prayer and a promise all at once. Tommy kept his eyes on the scratch. "I am all right," he said, though it might not be true. He wanted the man to hear the courage, even if the world was loud. The scar on Dale's nose blanched as his nostrils flared. He smiled without humor. Everything in him said now. The air thinned, the way it does in the second before a bottle falls and breaks. Tommy tasted pennies again. He thought of his blanket behind the dumpster and hated that he had thought of it. He would not be the boy who worried about his bed while a man bled. He let his arms hang loose, the way fighters do before bells, not because he knew how to fight, but because he understood that tight things snap sooner. He slid a whisper of weight to his back foot. He kept the rider in the edge of his vision like a star you steer by. The scar, the red light, the chalk line on his cheek, the coffee cooling. Mike's hand on the phone, the hungry town holding its breath. Everything arranged itself like pieces on a board. Tommy had the small, unjust comfort of knowing he would lose, and he chose to stand anyway. The choice made him taller. Not much. Enough. Dale's palm flattened against Tommy's chest again, and the camera looked and did not look away. Dale kept his hand against Tommy's chest for a heartbeat too long, pressing not with strength but with ownership, as if smoothing a label onto glass. Heat soaked through cotton and skin. The pressure did not hurt. It announced. Then his hand dropped, and the space that should have opened did not. The men around them tilted inward, as if the lot itself were sloped toward trouble. Through the thin soles of his shoes, Tommy felt grit, and the sticky seam where old gasoline had dried to varnish. The chalk line of sun along his cheek had climbed toward his temple, a narrow blade of light. Breath wanted to run. He shortened it by choice. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He pinned his gaze to the small white scratch on the bridge of Dale's nose, the single imperfection he could hold, because a flaw could be turned into a map, and a map could be survived. Kyle moved first. Not much. A scrape of heel, a shoulder angling just enough to choke a path. He slid his body so the way past the pump became a picture instead of an option. Chad's stance softened into that dangerous readiness that looks like relaxation until it does not. Ricky's jaw clicked as the toothpick settled, and his hand drifted toward the place where a man pins another man by the elbow. Tommy B wore a grin that waited for a cue. The rider shifted a fraction, as if to make space for Tommy to back out. But the fraction froze, and then it was too late for stepping away. The hour narrowed. Above them, the small red eye inside the canopy camera glowed without blinking, patient as a clock that refuses both hurry and delay. "Leave him," Tommy said, and the steadiness of his own voice startled him again. Words set in the air the way concrete sets in a form. He could not pour them back. Dale tilted his head and measured. Curiosity flashed across his face, not softening it but sharpening it, as if he had found a creature that should not exist and wanted to know the taste first. He looked past the rider, past the bike, and settled on the boy who refused to be moved. A narrow smile arrived without humor. He stepped sideways. It was a small motion that changed everything. The circle drew itself. Kyle took a long breath and slid. Chad pivoted, the toe of his boot sketching a crescent in dust. Ricky ghosted behind the rider's shoulder, not touching yet, testing distance with his breath. Tommy B floated toward the mouth of the lot like someone training for the line. "I was almost there." Tommy's body knew the math and did not like it. 5 bodies, trained by boredom and mean habit. 1 man who would not strike first. 1 boy who had never landed a punch in his life. Numbers spoke, but numbers were not the only language. There was the promise that fit inside him like a key. There was a veteran bleeding on cold pavement, while a town looked away. There was a gas station owner who made grace look like carelessness and never said a name he had not earned. The rider turned, careful as a person laying a tool back into the right slot. He kept his hands loose and visible. He set his feet where a shove would not fold him. His eyes kept moving, not fast, but constantly counting angles. "Kid," he said, not pleading, offering. Tommy gave the smallest shake of his head. The rider absorbed the no without nodding, and a thin line held between them, taut and nearly invisible, strong as fishing wire. Dale slid his knuckles under Tommy's chin and lifted it a fraction, a gesture that looked almost gentle until the contempt under it showed through. Tommy let his jaw float with the touch, and then lowered it on his own. "I am standing," he told the part of himself that still wanted to crouch. The truth settled into his spine. "Do you know who you are talking to, boy?" Dale asked, not as a question but as a threat, shaped like one. "I am talking to a man with a scratch on his nose," Tommy thought, and the thought almost made a smile stir, which would have been a mistake. He breathed instead. He kept his focus on the scratch and let the rest blur. Turn a man into a flaw, and he becomes small enough to survive. Behind Dale, the rider tipped right to make a lane. Ricky and Tommy B stepped into it without speaking, 2 doors closing. The silence between them practiced. The rider's left arm brushed Ricky's palm. Ricky latched to skin, not bone, just enough to steal leverage. The angle turned bad for the rider's shoulder. Muscle rememberpin. The rider dropped his weight and slid his elbow along Ricky's forearm, not to hurt, only to find space. He moved like someone adjusting a knot in cloth, patient and strong, refusing to tear fabric because fabric matters. Kyle's lips peeled back without warmth. "You still got time to walk," he told the rider, but he left no room in the sentence for yes. Mike was a reflection behind glass, 1 hand on the phone, the other without a job, hovering in the air like a question. His mouth shaped the word sheriff. Then it shaped the word now. His eyes did not leave the lot. Dale's attention returned to Tommy. Curiosity left. Appetite stayed. He liked the careful choreography of this moment. The gold line of sun on the boy's face. The way the rider could not reach the boy without tearing free of the quiet holds, already waiting to become hard. Dale lifted one shoulder in a shrug that said, "This is what happens." Tommy did not plan to move. His body moved. The shift began at the ankles the way a willow gives in wind. He stepped into the space Dale wanted and ate a mouthful of it. He was not bold. He was not reckless. He made a claim. The thin line of motion changed a boundary that had seemed fixed. Dale's smile flattened. It was a small change. It was enough to say he had noticed. "Teach him," Kyle said, bright and cruel, adrenal joy ringing in his voice like a bell. Chad's hands uncurled like an opening jaw. He rolled his neck once, and ropey tendons lifted under skin. "You sure?" he asked the air, which meant he was asking himself permission he had already given. Tommy's lungs pulled thin air. Metal tasted like a coin under his tongue. The light widened. The camera's red point burned without a blink. A flag cracked on its pole. A paper flyer on the bulletin board trembled as if it felt vibration arrive before sound. Dale shifted onto his back foot and rolled his shoulder. A fraction. Little muscles along his forearm tightened like tuned strings. Tommy's stomach lifted and then dropped, but his legs stayed. Running lived in him as a habit, and he denied it. He did not glance to the rider to ask for rescue. There was no rescue but the choice already made. The first motion did not come from Dale. It came from the pack. Ricky's grip on the rider's arm firmed. Tommy B set his boot on the rider's heel to steal balance and make it look like clumsiness. Kyle leaned in by inches, pure crowding. Chad sighed through his nose like a bull measuring distance, before lowering the head. Small wolf motions. "We are already a circle. You are already meat." Tommy stepped again, a half step, stealing another mouth of the line. "Leave him," he said a third time. The word leave came out flat and clean, stronger than his age should allow. Only after he heard it did he understand he had meant it for himself as well. Leave the boy who hides. Leave the rule that kept you alive and took your face. Leave the old job of being unseen. He did not say any of that. He breathed and stood. Dale's eyes hardened. Play ended. He reached, not for the throat Tommy's fear offered him, but for the shoulder. The way a person grips a young dog before it learns the hard lesson. Tommy twisted away without thinking, and the quick burn of skin on skin flashed across his collarbone. That was when the rider moved. He did not lunge. He tilted. Gravity. He turned into the hold instead of out of it, stealing the grip's leverage, and slid his elbow toward open space. His boots kissed the ground, soft scuffs, the body angled to protect rather than punish. He moved like a bird that throws a shadow on the ground before anyone hears its wings. Kyle saw the shift and slung an arm across the rider's chest. Tommy B stomped the rider's heel again, and this time did not bother to disguise the intention. The circle tightened, the live animal of it waking. Tommy went where instinct did not send him. He stepped into the seam between the rider and the nearest shoulder and put his small body there, stubborn as a branch that keeps a rock from rolling farther than it should. He did not raise his fists. He did not know where to put them. He did not roar. He stood. Kyle barked a laugh, delighted and contemptuous in a single sound. "Look at him," he said. "Brave," he said, making the word sound dirty. Dale did not laugh. His face cooled the way steel cools when a smith is done hammering and only temper remains. He brought his shoulder forward and let the fist rise from habit more than rage. The way summer storms lift out of prairie afternoons after a long rehearsal of humidity, Tommy saw the fist shaping itself and saw, with the clarity that terror gives, that it aimed for his face as easily as a thrown stone seeks a bottle. He did not know to slip. He did not know to parry. His body ducked in the clumsiest hinge from the waist. An unlearned bow. Air of the strike brushed his ear. A thin reed whistle. He had not outsmarted the punch. Fear sharpened him one sliver sooner than Dale expected. That sliver bought a breath and charged him a stumble. His knee clipped the hose, slung from pump to tank. Rubber kissed his shin and tried to wrap him. He flung a hand out and slapped hot metal. Heat bit into palm, and he held anyway. The rider jerked against hands holding him, and did not take the bad bargain of strength for reach. He kept his stance and his jaw and his eyes. "Kid," he said, and the words sounded less like a call to Tommy than a command spoken to the world. A sentence the world would answer because it had to. Tommy's world had narrowed to the scratch on Dale's nose, and the next thing likely to happen below it. The first punch had missed, the next would not. Plans felt like lies. He had the promise that brought him here. He had breath. Ricky laughed, a nervous burr in it because something about a miss unsettled him. His grip slipped on sweat. Tommy B glanced at the street and swallowed hard. Chad rolled his shoulders to set his own timing. Kyle licked his teeth. Dale reset without drama. The second punch gathered weight from a deeper place. Not the beer's soft, show-off swing, but the practiced arm of a man who has thrown too many hits in too many lots where no one stopped him. Elbow tucked, hip turned, shoulder rolled. Tommy watched the scratch blur and streak. He thought one clean thought: do not close your eyes. He did not close them. The punch cut air with the sound fast things make when they own the space between 2 points. It missed by the width of a breath. The whistle slid past his ear and drew a cold line across the fire along his temple. He had ducked again without elegance or plan. A frantic fold, the stupid luck of timing. The world lurched and settled crooked. He was still standing. The rider saw the miss and felt hope he did not want and could not stop. Mike behind the glass pressed the phone tighter and said, "Now again," into a voice miles away. The camera did its unblinking work, storing light like a pond stores stars, patient and exact. After the second miss, Dale's face did not twist. It cooled. He would not miss again. Tommy lifted his chin by inches because some kinds of bravery are nothing more than refusing to bow. Copper washed his tongue. Hot rubber and stale beer and scorched paint braided in the air. Grit under the edge of his shoe bit his skin through the thin sole. He fixed on the scratch and the knuckles and the shoulder and accepted the tremor in his own legs as part of the price. The third punch began to gather. The circle leaned with it, somewhere very far away. Sirens had not yet started. Somewhere very close, the rider's breath shortened once and even. Mike's hand pressed into plastic. The camera stared. The wind fell still. Tommy did not pray. He did not count. He stood on the choice he had made, and in the heartbeat before impact that choice felt like ground. The third punch gathered like weather. Tommy saw it coil in the shoulder and rise through the arm. A clean line that wasted nothing. He held the scratch on Dale's nose in his sight and refused the old urge to make himself small. Small would not stop anything. Small would not honor the promise. The fist came. It did not miss. It landed along the cheekbone and swept pain sideways. A blunt flare that washed the world in red and gold and a sudden edge of black. Sound went crooked. The lot tilted. Tommy tasted iron and held his feet through a sway that wanted him on the ground. His knees shook and learned stay the way. A dog learns heel. By repetition and sheer will. Another shape moved. He did not see which. A blow found the ribs. A hard stick jammed between bones. Air left him in a single, startled cough. For a breath, the world thinned to white. Somewhere, someone made a pleased sound. The small delight of a bully hearing a bell ring. Anger struck a match in Tommy. A tiny light in dry grass. The rider's voice cracked the air. A single command that might have been enough somewhere else. Hands pinned him, elbows hooked and locked. He could not reach the boy without tearing his shoulder from the safest angle. He did not trade the long fight for a short reach. He kept his eyes on Tommy instead, and that look became a rope thrown across distance, thin and strong. Tommy swung once, a clumsy swipe he hated as soon as it left him. His fist touched nothing. Shame came and went, a useless guest. Dale laughed low in his throat, not gleeful, Amused, as if the boy had brought a paper sword to a field of iron, he stepped in and put another fist into Tommy's ribs. Lower now, deeper. The body knows when something gives. The crack was not only sound, it was a slide inside, a wrongness that would not take orders. Tommy sagged, caught a single stubborn inch of balance, wretched, dry, and swallowed the noise clawing his throat. Inside the glass, Mike bit the word now and pushed it through the phone. He pressed the receiver harder, as if pressure could shorten the miles between need and help. A voice promised cars. Promises have to travel roads. Ricky yanked on the rider's arm. Tommy B jammed a heel behind the rider's foot and grinned like a child who has learned a magic trick. Kyle crowded close enough for heat to share. The rider braced, quiet and calculating, choosing tiny losses to avoid the large one that would leave the boy alone. His vest pressed a flat rectangle against his chest. His hand brushed it without meaning to. A small pat where a photograph lived, the past asking for a hold while the present burned. Dale lifted his knuckles slow, not with fatigue but with pleasure, as a man about to place a cut, exactly where he wants the scar. Sweat and dust, and the sweet rot of spilt soda thinned the air. Blood warmed along Tommy's upper lip. He tasted it and swallowed, and lifted his chin the way a fence post stands against wind. Hit me again, he thought, and hated that the thought sounded like permission. Think of something better. Keep him off the rider. Keep your feet. Chad slid in and drove a fist into Tommy's belly. Pain hit and turned to a heavy drag against his spine. Tommy folded and flung an unplanned backhand that wrapped Dale's forearm. It was nothing as a strike. It was everything as defiance. Surprise died in Dale's face and left decision. His breath smelled like sour beer, and meat left too long out of shade. "You done?" Dale asked almost kindly. Tommy shook his head because he did not know how to nod to that. The small shake cost him air. Dale's mouth thinned. He had his answer. The next hit split skin high on the cheek. Shock sang in his ear. He staggered and saved himself with the same blistered palm against hot metal. The canopy camera watched without sentiment. Its red dot, a bored heartbeat. Across the circle, the rider's eyes found Tommy's an unmade fear. The look was not pity and not praise. It was recognition. "You shows?" it said. "I see it." The look steadied him like a hand between his shoulder blades. "Leave him," Tommy said. The words had gravel in them, and still came out a line someone could stand on. He pulled breath slow through a body that wanted to pant. Breath obeyed the shape of his will and returned in small, obedient pieces. Sirens were not yet sound. He wished for them, then refused the wish because hope can lie. He would not build on lying ground. Kyle's elbow clipped the rider's jaw. A grunt broke loose from the man, and he nearly made a path before Tommy B slammed his hip and closed it. The rider reset like a craftsman who knows the shape of the wood and will not rush the cut. "One more second," his body said, and then another, and then another. Dale's fist went flat and cruel into the corner of Tommy's mouth. Heat burst along the cheekbone. His legs argued over duty. He let them argue, and did not go down. He felt something like pride, and allowed it because the feeling cost him nothing now, and gave him posture. "Stop," the rider barked. The word had iron in it, that men learn to obey in other rooms. It met the wrong soil here and slid off. The circle held. Tommy lifted empty hands. Inside his chest, a seam began to pull shut in the wrong direction. Breath turned to a job done under protest. Panic pawed at a door and found it latched. He pressed his tongue to a rough tooth and rode the small pain out of the larger one. Another shot hammered the same rib, and a small dog sound snuck out of him. He swallowed it. Shame rose, and he starved it. He saw Dale's weight shift and felt the kick coming. He chose wrong. and the boot found the meat of his thigh. His legs stuttered and lost current. A boot hooked his ankles from behind, and the ground took him. Hands and knees, pavement grated skin. He tried to push up. A boot pinned his wrist and drove, bones rarely worn. They declare. The break was a wet, decisive pop. The world flared, and then went beyond noise, to a quiet that felt like distance. Do not scream, he told himself. The command was not brave. It was necessary. He bit the inside of his cheek until the taste changed to new blood, and rode the wave without giving the sound a door. Pressure lifted. Air touched the broken place with soft cruelty. He curled the arm to his chest and guarded it with the rest of his body. Breathing took math now. From the corner of his vision, the rider erupted a handspan, rage slamming through restraint, and the hands holding him dug deeper. He did not quit the struggle. He turned the surge into fuel for endurance, a low blue burn that lasts. Still think 5-on-1 is unfair? Dale asked, teaching math to a boy who already understood scale. Tommy could not answer. He pushed up with his good hand. His knees wobbled. Gravel gnawed. He made a half-crouch and stayed there because standing tall would be theater, and he had no breath for theater. Leave him, he said again. The whisper reached no one, and reached him. Sirens slid into the world like a thin wire, and then a thicker rope, and then a braided cable pulling attention tight. The first swell touched the hairs on his neck and set them upright. Dale's head turned a fraction. Kyle's grin cracked. Ricky muttered a curse with no conviction. Tommy B looked for a hole in a fence he had not bothered to find earlier. Move, the rider said. Go. The tone was order, not plea, and hid a fear so clean it sliced. Tommy shook his head slow, a refusal shaped in pain. Running would be correct and would be betrayal. He set his feet, though they quivered. He lifted his chin, though it shook. His mind threw up a picture of his blanket behind the dumpster, and he loved and hated that at once. You keep what keeps you, he thought, and then thought, this is what keeps me. Dale hit him in the belly, and the body folded, like a hinge that had been waiting all afternoon. The lot blurred at the edges. He swallowed bile and saved a rag of dignity, because rags count. A hand caught the back of his shirt and flung him sideways with ease that insulted him. His shoulder hit first and rolled him to his back. Sky poured into his eyes, a hammered sheet of white blue. A hawk turned a wide circle high up, engraved against the brightness like a coin. His lungs refused to open. This is where I pass out, he thought, and then did not. He dragged a mean scrap of air inside and held it with both hands. Boots stood over him. Dale's face leaned in, upside down, a man peering into a well. You learned enough? He asked. Tears pressed. They were not pity. They were lack of air. He refused them because salt stings cut skin. Keep eyes, he told himself. Do not show the throat. Beyond Dale's shoulder, the rider's face undid him more than any blow. Panic held down and compressed into purpose. The look of a man who had lost a son and now watched a stranger's boy stand where that son would have stood. The rider wrenched and failed and did not stop trying. His mouth shaped a word. Run! The sirens turned the corner and doubled on the brick, loud enough to shove breath back into chests. Dale frowned at the clock of sound and straightened. Enough, he said, as if answering a bell he disliked. He stomped Tommy's ankle once in petty punctuation, not to break, to mark, and turned away. Tommy rolled to an elbow. The elbow tried to be a wrist and remembered it could not. A sound escaped, and he killed it as soon as it lived. He forced his good hand under him and sat up. The pickup coughed, roared, snapped gravel. Dale leaned across the seat and hit a switch because he liked the feel of hitting anything. Kyle whooped. Ricky slapped metal. Tommy B's face pinched and pretended not to. Mike burst through the door and shouted a word no one had heard from him in years. "Do not!" The sharpness cut through everything. It stopped the rider one fraction long enough to save him from the bumper. The truck fishtailed, corrected, and shot for the road. Dust curled after it. Sirens painted the lot in stuttering blues and reds. The rider dropped to his knees at Tommy's side. In the odd hush that rides behind loud, the man's breath sounded ragged and almost reckless. "Why?" he asked, voice raw. "Why would you do that?" The question fell into Tommy like a brick in a pond, heavy and final, sending rings into places he would not visit for days. He had to pick between air and words. He tried both and tasted iron. Somebody had to, he whispered. He did not know if the words reached. He knew they were true. Hands found him that were not cruel. Mike's trembling palm on his shoulder, a paramedic's calm pressure, and a square of cloth cool against heat. The clean-cut smell of antiseptic shouldering in among diesel and blood and hot rubber. A name asked carefully. He gave it, and almost surprised himself to find he still owned one. They lifted him. The canopy camera watched and kept its red dot steady. The rider rose when told and would not leave the stretcher's side, walking lockstep, one hand on cold rail as if touch could keep the world from dropping what it had tried to break. Tommy turned his head because he needed a compass. The man beside him was north. "You okay?" Tommy asked, which was ridiculous and honest. The rider swallowed and nodded once, a move that meant not really. "And also, I am here." Sirens closed over them like weather. The ambulance doors opened and swallowed light. Inside was white and humming and official. Outside became a shrinking rectangle and then a strip and then gone. Tommy thought of sleep. "Not yet," the paramedic said. "Stay with me." He obeyed because obedience, for once, felt like winning. He fixed on the paramedic's steady face and matched the breathing shown to him. He held the rider's voice near his shoulder, saying, "I will not leave." He held Mike's wet, furious eyes in the rear window for one last beat as the rig pulled away. On the canopy, the camera blinked its work. In the glass door, the reflection of a boy's blood and a man's vest and a town's choice layered into a single picture the lot would remember after the dust settled. Tommy shut his eyes for the length of one breath and opened them again. Pain mapped him. He read it like a town he might leave, and one day visit only for directions. The band wrapped his ribs and told him breathing would be a careful craft for a while. He found the rider again, a shadow large enough to make shade, a presence large enough to carry weight. "Run," the man had said. He had not. He did not yet know that sometimes running is staying, and sometimes staying is the bravest speed a body can reach. Fluorescent light flattened the room to one patient shade, a humming white that made even the curtains look tired. Tommy lay under it and stayed awake, because awake meant here, and here meant the body had not slipped back to the dark water where pain turned to a shape and drowned him. He counted breaths, the way he had once counted returnable bottles. Slow and careful. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The wrap around his ribs reminded him when he forgot and tried for more. His broken wrist throbbed its own drum under the smaller high pains, steady and stubborn, a reminder that some clocks keep their own time. A nurse moved in the soft, professional quiet of people who work beside trouble without inviting it to sit. She asked for a number for his pain, and he wanted to say none, and also all. So he said enough, and she adjusted something that turned the edge down without erasing it. She spoke words like alignment and immobilize and observation. And then she said, "Rest," like it was a door she could open for him. The room smelled of antiseptic and warmed plastic and the faint old ghost of coffee from a pot that never quite emptied. A monitor clicked and painted small green mountains. A cuff hugged his arm and sighed off. clear tape held a sensor against his finger and winked a little red dot like a watchman. On his unbroken wrist, a white band circled warm skin. When the scanner passed over it, the machine answered with a neat, quick beep, and his name shone up on a tablet. He read it the way thirsty people read signs, grateful to find it spelled the way he remembered. Beneath it, a time code printed in small gray type. He did not speak out loud. He felt the stamp like a nail set into a beam. The lot had the camera. The bed had the band. The world had begun to keep a record even if people forgot. He drifted and rose and drifted. Pain would not let him fall far. It tugged him back by the sleeve whenever sleep reached for him. He learned to walk the narrow shoulder between waking and the drop, because walking there was less work than climbing all the way up again. The hallway whispered with rubber soles and the soft ring of a metal cart. Somewhere, a vending machine gave up a can with a hollow clunk that sounded like a small door closing. Every sound came from far away, and also from right against his skull. The way hospital nights bend distance. He turned his head a fraction, and the room tilted. In the chair just inside the door sat the rider, elbows on knees, hands laced and still. The leather vest looked wrong in this white light, like a road map hung on a clean wall. His gloves were hooked in his back pocket. His hands were work-scarred and quiet. Lines cut deep around his eyes, and deeper still around the mouth. He stared at the floor, as if the floor had asked a hard question, and he owed it an honest answer. When Tommy shifted, the man looked up, and the tired broke into something like relief that made it hard to breathe. "You are here," the man said, not asking, "Marking." Tommy nodded, because nodding cost less than words, and still counted. A doctor arrived with a gravity that felt like a safe bridge. He spoke calmly, the way people talk when they are carrying something delicate. "Bruises," the doctor said, "and a concussion to watch, and ribs cracked but not shattered. One clean and one hairline. The wrist was reduced and splinted. Surgery in the morning when the team and the room were ready. Any dizziness, any new lights, any nausea, tell us." He bent until his eyes and Tommy's eyes shared a line. "You did a hard thing, son. Now your job is to rest." Tommy watched the fine place at the doctor's throat, where a tie might have lived if television were true, and stored the words, "The way you store bread." Not to admire but to use. When the doctor left, the rider drew his chair closer in a careful scrape and set his knees beside the bed. He lowered his voice until the sound stayed between them. "Why did you do that?" he asked, the same question as before, but opened wider. "Palm instead of fist." "Because somebody had to," Tommy said, and the words felt almost foolish in a room this clean, but they carried something heavy enough to stand on. The man did not smile or correct him. He nodded once, like a person checking a box on a list of true things. "My name is," the man began, and paused, as if the name he wore on the road had to take off its jacket before it came inside. "My name is Marcus," he said at last. "People call me Crow. You can call me Marcus." Tommy let the name sit on his tongue without speaking it. It tasted like metal in a good way, like a tool that fits the hand. Marcus looked at the white band around Tommy's wrist and said, "I will not leave." And he said it like a promise a man could be fined for breaking. Sometime later the air changed in the small way hospital air can change. Coffee smell thickened the white. A paper cup tapped metal and made a hollow song. Mike stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups in the fragile, careful grip of someone carrying more than liquid. His eyes were red with washed-out fury and relief. He looked at Tommy and looked away, because looking full at a hurt boy asks permission. "Brought this for him," he said, nodding toward Marcus. "And this one for me. You get water." It was a joke as small as a penny, and it still counted. The sandwiches, Tommy said, and felt foolish the second it left his mouth, like he had opened the wrong drawer. Mike understood the other sentence that lived under that one. He set a cup down and put his hand on the blanket near Tommy's good arm. Not touching skin. The way you place a gift without making a show. You do not owe me anything, Mike said, and the words came hard like he had been practicing against an argument Tommy had not made. You did not have to step out, but you did. He swallowed, and the swallow looked like an old pain. Thank you. Marcus took the coffee and wrapped his hands around the heat like a man thawing tools. He told Mike, thank you, with a quiet that forced the room to hear it. Mike turned his cap because his hands needed a job, and the cap had learned to be one. They sat in the soft arithmetic of a hospital night. A tech slid a plate under Tommy's back and said, hold and hold and hold. While the machine looked through him, forms appeared that Tommy could not sign. Mike took them and promised to get them where they belonged. The promise sounded like a thing he could make true even if the rules said otherwise. A deputy came, hat in hand, but questions in pocket. He asked what happened, and Tommy told pieces in the plain way you tell yourself when you want to be able to sleep later. He kept the part where he stepped into the circle because leaving it out would make the rest a lie. The deputy wrote. Mike handed him a small black drive wrapped in a napkin like something breakable and labeled in careful letters that looked steadier than his hand had felt. Chain of custody, the deputy said, and logged it in a small book with a time and a name. Evidence slid from a lot to a pocket to a desk, each hand making a note to prove it had not vanished. Do you want to press charges? The deputy asked, and the question felt like asking if he wanted weather. Marcus said he does not need to answer that tonight. The deputy agreed and left with the napkin and the careful name. Later, a woman in a blazer came in with a folder and a voice that knew how to sit down without a chair. She said social worker and placement, and only if you need, and asked if there was anyone to call. Tommy said no, and felt the word under his sternum like a rock. Marcus said, I am staying. She measured that, not with suspicion, but with a scale she carried inside. Morning, she said, and made morning sound like a place you could arrive. The rider became part of the furniture in the way faithful things do. The chair learned his weight. The hours folded like blankets and stacked along the wall. Mike dozed and woke and apologized to the room for the crime of being human. The nurse changed the ice bag and said, there you are. And it sounded like, you are still here. Good. Tommy watched the cheap tile near the bed and traced the pretend veins, line to line, square to square. A quiet map that asked nothing and still kept him company. Marcus's phone, face down on his knee, glowed and dimmed and glowed. He picked it up and typed with the care of someone writing a confession. He set it down. He picked it up again and made a call. He did not raise his voice, and he did not rush, and he said the boy's name in a way that made the name feel taller. He listened a long time and said thank you like a promise answered, and when he hung up the room felt a degree more held, as if unseen hands had found the edges and lifted. Go home, Marcus told Mike after the coffee cooled. You have done enough. Mike shook his head like a man arguing with a mirror and lost to himself on purpose. I will leave when he sleeps. Tommy wanted to say I am both asleep and awake, but the sentence would not carry its own weight. He breathed instead and let them both be right. Near what the night calls its middle, a nurse dimmed the light. One soft click, and the color inside the white discovered depth. The monitor drew steady hills. The cuff breathed like a tired animal curling at his elbow and settling. Marcus folded his hands and let his head dip for a moment into a pilot's rest. One ear tuned for trouble, one promise keeping him upright. Tommy stared at the band on his wrist until the letters stopped wriggling. He felt a line run from the red blink of the camera above the pumps to the gray print on this plastic loop, a thread stitched through two scenes. He did not know it would pull a wide gathering of engines across a morning. He knew only that his own engine still turned, rough and noisy and alive. He let his eyes slide closed, not falling, only resting behind his lids. He felt Marcus near him like shade against bright. He felt Mike's stubborn loyalty, like a hand that had learned where to rest and when to lift. The hospital breathed around him, a machine town humming through its night. He decided to breathe with it until morning arrived, and asked its next hard questions. He did not say the word safe. He did not trust it yet. He let the night sit down in the chair beside his bed and keep watch with the man who had promised not to leave. And for the first time in a long time, the dark did not hide him. It held him where he could be seen. Morning arrived the way it always does in hospitals, by changing the temperature of the light rather than its color. The white stayed white, but it woke. Tommy lay where the night had left him, and learned that time here was measured not by clocks, but by hands. New hands replaced old ones at the door. New voices said good morning without asking if it was true. He said it back because saying it proved he was still here. Breath came like a job he had agreed to keep. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Small work done on a careful ledger. The wrap around his ribs pressed and warned him away from heroics. His wrist beat its own slow drum. Beneath the medicine's soft filing of edges, the pain was shaped instead of erased, and the shape made the story honest. A day nurse scanned the band on his good wrist. The device chirped against plastic. His name lit up on a small screen, and beneath it, a thin gray line printed a time, a stamp, a moment hammered into record. He did not say the hour. He touched it with his eyes and let them move on, the way a fingertip checks a nailhead to feel if it is seated. The parking lot had a camera. The bed had a band. The world had begun a thread that connected both places and tightened. Breakfast arrived, gentle and pale. He swallowed a few spoonfuls and learned that swallowing could feel like an accomplishment. The nurse praised him for a thing babies, master, and men forget to be proud of. He tucked the praise away. Pride did not hurt. Marcus had not left. The plastic chair had learned the shape of him and kept it, an imprint of watchfulness. He sat forward, elbows on knees, hands folded, as if he could wrestle stillness into obedience. When he looked up, there was light behind his eyes that had not been there in the night. Not relief, purpose. Mike slid in with a borrowed duffel and set it by the window, as if apologizing for how big the world can be. Brought a shirt that looks like a shirt, he said, and socks that will not fight back. The joke was as small as air, and it still did its work. Tommy nodded. Nodding had become his safest word. The doctor returned, and the bridge in his voice held steady. Surgery for the wrist, he said. Not yet. Soon. When people and room and day aligned, the bone had been set. Pins would keep it honest. Do you understand? Tommy did not understand metal inside him. He understood that careful plans were being made, and his body had been invited to join them. He nodded. Rest until they call, the doctor said, and his tone made rest sound like an assignment a man could complete. A deputy stepped in and stood just inside the door, hat in hand, questions tucked away. We logged the drive, he said, and showed a thin pink slip with the word received stamped in proper blue and a date spelled out and a time recited in the exact cadence uniforms learn. He tapped the line with a capped pen. Paper had taken the story in, and paper would insist on it later. Tommy did not hear the numbers the way the deputy did. He heard the rhythm, the rise and fall of words you could repeat to prove a door had been opened and then closed. The deputy folded the slip carefully, twice, then twice again, turning it into something you could hand to another person and say, "This is true." He glanced at Marcus, then back at Tommy, We have the lot on video, he said quietly. We have their faces. Echo set like a nail tapped deeper. They did not know the camera had seen them when the sun hung low, but the folder knew, the stamp knew, the slip knew. Those would keep knowing when men tried to forget. The woman from the night before returned with a steadier smile and a notebook that looked like responsibility. She asked if there was anyone to call. Tommy said no. She asked if he wanted someone from the county to sit after the operation if these two needed to sleep. Marcus answered without looking away from him. I will be here. Mike said, I will be here too, and gave Marcus a look that understood how standing together is a choice you keep choosing. The woman wrote morning as if it were not already happening and left the door open on purpose, then closed it on purpose, both gestures meaning we will respect the air. A transport aide arrived with a gurney that squeaked once, remembered itself, and rolled quiet. The aide's voice was bright with practice. Time for your nap, champ. Tommy would have smiled if his lip had not remembered where it split. They lifted him as if measuring, not carrying. Ceiling tilas marched overhead, each square pretending to be stone and succeeding because people are kind to ceilings. Clipboards exchanged. Signatures bloomed like small black birds. Chain of people, chain of paper, chain of lights. He rode all three. Pre-op smelled like sharpened air and warm plastic. A nurse with soft eyebrows cupped a mask over his face and told him to think of water. He thought of the shallow puddle behind the dumpster after rain, oil swirling into a stolen rainbow that still tried to be beautiful. He tried to apologize to his mother for picking a puddle. He could not decide if apologies needed rules. The mask deepened over scent, and then scent went away. A wheel rattled over a seam in the floor. That tiny thud, where one square of the world meets another, and then there was nothing. He woke like a boat returning from fog, by recognizing shapes and then learning names. The recovery light was kinder, feathered by shade. His wrist was heavy and honest, held in a new shell. Beneath it he could feel the tidy ache of work completed. His ribs hissed when he asked for too much. He tested a careful cough and learned to avoid it. A nurse with a different laugh said he had been a champion under sleep, which is both silly and strangely important. She rubbed the back of his good hand in a small circle and drifted on and dozed. They brought him back to the room. The blinds were drawn against noon. Marcus rose before the wheels finished moving. Mike slept badly in a second chair, cap slanting toward one ear, his throat making a sound like someone turning a page. The wall clock ticked in jumpy seconds, but Tommy did not read it. He measured by sound. At first, the sounds were hospital, shoes and wheels, the whisper of curtains. The beep, that is the machine's way of saying, keep going. Then another sound reached under all of that, low and patient, a hum that could have been weather or highway. It came and went in a wide curve, rising, settling, rising again, like someone testing a note and finding the pitch. The blinds trembled a fraction. A metal tray rang a tiny, clear note against itself. Mike jerked awake and stared at the window as if it had said his name. Marcus stepped to the glass and lifted one slat with a fingertip. He did not smile. He did not recite a line that belonged to a movie. He said only they heard, quiet enough that the words were more seen than heard. The way a rock alters water to prove it is there. Tommy did not understand scale. He understood purpose. The hum lived in his ribs alongside the ache. And the two were not enemies. It swelled, spread its palms wider, and the window frame made the polite sound wood makes when it agrees to hold and still give. A volunteer in a citrus vest leaned in with a surprised, tilted smile. Quite a gathering outside, she said cheerfully. Motorcycle club or something. They are being very respectful. Do not worry. She left before anyone could answer. Respectful felt like a new word in this building. It fit Tommy thought of the rope he had imagined in the lot, the look between him and the rider that had thrown a line across distance. Now he heard that rope stretched from farther than he knew. The old guilt he carried about, the veteran who bled and vanished, changed shape. It did not leave. It leaned, leaning counted. The rumble deepened until it was not sound anymore, but weather. It shook truth out of the thin glass and rattled the coins in the pocket of the old man, 2 rooms down, who kept his pants on even in a gown. The man called out once, sharp as a kettle, and settled when a nurse patted his shoulder and said, "That is engines. Mr. Lake. No storms today." Marcus's shoulders loosened by a shade a stranger would not measure. The hard line of his jaw softened, as if a weight that did not belong there had been set down. He did not look away from the window. He counted, without moving his lips. Mike took off his cap and held it against his chest, the way men do in rooms where vows are spoken. A volunteer returned with a laminated sign and taped it to the inside of the door. 2 visitors at a time, please, printed in polite letters. Someone had drawn a clumsy smile beside the words with a pen that looked like it had been dragged through a small storm. Marcus thanked her. She looked surprised to be thanked and then not surprised. Outside, the hum changed. It organized. It found rhythm the way marching feet find it on a long road. Engines in formation did not sound like noise. They sounded like decision. Tommy had never known that. He learned it lying very still. The sound lifted the hair on his arms. He was not afraid. He was not exactly anything. He was made of small things that together meant ready. A nurse entered with a pen and a form and a brave mouth. She checked the band again and wrote the hour in a box. The box did not care what time it held. Only that ink landed and stayed. Paper spoke to paper. Blue stamp to pink slip. Camera to folder. Folder to a room with wood chairs and flags. Tommy let that chain build in his mind and then set it down. He could live in only 1 room at a time. Marcus turned from the window and set his hands lightly on the rail. He did not grip. He did not press. He looked at Tommy. Not at the bruises or the shell on his wrist, but at the boy himself. "You are not alone," he said. A weather report more than a promise. The words landed and sank, not because they were heavy, but because they were true. Truth sinks. Lies float and look useful until the wind changes. Tommy drew a careful breath and felt the ache make a little space for air. He stored that fact like food. He nodded. He wanted to ask how many. He did not. He wanted to say he did not deserve this. He did not. He wanted to ask if they would still come if he had run. He did not. He held the single rope of being seen and did not tug. It held without being tested. In the hallway, footsteps arranged themselves into a pattern that belonged on parade grounds and not in a hospital. The blinds vibrated like a soft applause. Somewhere a child laughed, not understanding perfectly. The hour lifted its head. Tommy closed his eyes for one breath and opened them again. Beyond the glass, across asphalt he could not yet see. Engines finished forming into a single voice. The room listened with him. The thread kept tightening. Red light to wristband, stamp to slip, vow to footfall. He lay very still and learned the sound of a promise arriving. By noon the hospital began to vibrate, not from machines but from distance collapsing. It started as a pressure behind the glass, as soft push on a til, as if the building itself remembered it stood on a road. Tommy felt it through the mattress before he heard it, an undercurrent gathering weight until it touched bone. Then the sound arrived, rolling like thunder that had found its direction. One engine became many, many became more. By the time the windows rattled in rhythm, the hum had turned into a single living roar. Nurses drifted toward the sound without meaning to. Orderlies paused with hands on carts, eyes sliding to the nearest slit of daylight. The intercom crackled once and gave up. There were no instructions for this. The day nurse who had scanned Tommy's wrist stood at the foot of his bed with her clipboard and forgot to write. "That cannot be for one boy," she whispered, and no one corrected her. Marcus rose from the night chair and crossed to the blinds. The slats quivered like startled birds. Below, the parking lot had become a map of arrival. Motorcycles filled every painted line, and then the grass beyond, spreading in arcs like black wings folding inward. Engines idled together, steady as prayer. Leather shone in sun. Patches caught the light. Club crests and road names and small memorial pins. A language of loyalty stitched by hand. At the front of the formation, 3 riders sat their wide-shouldered bikes. Marcus knew them before the helmets came off. He had called them before dawn with a voice like gravel and proof. Now they had come. He leaned his forehead against the glass and exhaled. The condensation stayed a moment. A ghost breath on the window. "They heard," Mike said from the corner, voice stuck between disbelief and reverence. His work-rough hands found each other and refused to part. He was still in yesterday's clothes, but his fear had changed shape. It had grown roots and turned into awe. Outside, engines quieted, one by one, like animals settling after a long run. The silence that followed weighed more than noise. It pressed against the walls and waited for direction. Marcus turned back to Tommy. "They came for you," he said, simple as weather. Tommy blinked, not sure what could be owned. Light from the window caught the white band on his wrist and threw chrome and sky across the plastic. His ribs complained when he tried to breathe faster. "Why?" he asked, and the word left his mouth raw. "Because somebody had to," Marcus answered, and the line that had once belonged to a boy now belonged to a room. Footsteps hurried in the hall. The social worker appeared with her folder held like a shield. The deputy followed, radio hissing with requests for traffic control. They both looked as if they had stepped into a storm mid-argument. "They are not violent," Marcus told them before they could speak. "They are standing watch." The deputy lifted a blind with 2 fingers and stared. "That is not standing," he murmured. "That is half the county. Then it is time the county stood for something." Marcus replied. His tone stayed quiet, and so it carried. Tommy could not see everything, only the edges, the glint and sway, the colors like spilled oil, the dark shapes of men who had traveled far enough to make their presence count. A small shiver moved through him. Disbelief and something like grief pressed flat. He had lived invisible. Now the world reflected him back in metal and noise. He raised his good hand and found it shaking. "Do they know my name?" he whispered. "They know the promise," Marcus said. "The rest is decoration." The deputy's radio barked again. "The sheriff wants to know if this is a protest or a parade." "It is a reckoning," Marcus said. "Tell him that." Phones lit in the nurse's station. Local news cut in with breathless anchors and bright letters. A camera on the lawn found a single empty chair at the front of the crowd. A folded denim vest rested on the seat. Marcus watched the feed and drew a breath that tasted like gasoline and redemption. "They are forming the circle," he said. "What does that mean?" Mike asked, closer to the window, now, cap in his hands. "It means they are waiting for the truth to step outside," Marcus said, almost to himself. Air shifted in the room as if the building inhaled with them. The hum beneath the walls turned slower, deeper. The sound of men who would not move until they had watched justice with their own eyes. The monitor kept its patient pulse, a small, steady echo, against the bass outside. Tommy's heart tried to match and fell off and tried again. Below, the riders opened a path toward the main doors. The deputy's radio crackled with reroutes and overflow. Security exchanged helpless glances. No policy covered 1,000 quiet engines. A nurse came in to check Tommy's numbers and stopped mid-step at the live feed. "Dear God," she said. soft as gauze. They really came. She looked at Tommy as if seeing him for the first time. The boy under the bruises. The reason an army had turned its exhaust into a hymn, "You must have done something good." Tommy stared at the cast and the tape and the faint blue map of veins. "I did not do anything," he said. "I just did not walk away. That is usually where everything worth doing begins." Marcus said. The radio on the deputy's shoulder hissed again. "The sheriff wants you outside." "See ya." Marcus looked at Tommy, then at the deputy. "He can wait," Marcus said. Tommy shook his head. "It is all right," the boy said. "Go." Marcus studied him for a breath and nodded. He set a hand on the rail and left it there, a heartbeat. "You will hear the engines when it is time," he said. When he stepped into the open air, the roar that rose to meet him was not cheer but recognition. The men at the front nodded once. The rest followed, a ripple through flesh and leather. Marcus walked to the empty chair and placed a hand on the folded vest. He lifted it so the patches faced the crowd. One bore a name no one had worn since a desert war. A small photo was pinned above the stitching. He raised the vest high, and the engines answered. The sound reached the 4th floor and went through the wall like weather, through Tommy's chest, and the bones that had been cracked but not conquered. It filled him until his eyes stung. It was not anger. It was witness. News cameras captured the moment. At a small gesture from Marcus, the roar collapsed into a silence, so careful it seemed carved. He spoke into a microphone, but the voice did not need it. "This is not revenge," he said. "This is remembrance." The boy stood where no one else would. "We stand, so no one has to stand alone again." Inside the room, the social worker lowered her folder. Mike looked up from the chair and whispered, "They are talking about you." Tommy shook his head. "They are talking about all of it," he said. Sirens flashed at the edge of the crowd, late to their own story. The deputy's voice rose on the lawn, guiding rather than warning. The gathering did not need policing. It was already ordered, purpose written in posture, and in the calm rhythm of engines, turned off and ready. A reporter asked what would happen next. Marcus pointed toward the hospital windows. "When he is well enough, he will tell his story," he said. "Until then, we wait right here. The truth can take its time." Cameras swung toward the glass, searching for the boy. On the 4th floor, Tommy saw the reflection of black lenses scattered like small dark stars. Heat climbed his face. "I do not want them to see me like this," he said. "Then they will wait until you can stand," Mike answered. He lifted the blind a fraction to show a slice of sky and chrome. From this height, the crowd looked like pieces of a single thought, dissection made flesh. The social worker stepped closer. "Most stories like yours fade before they finish," she said. "This looks like the start." "I do not want a story," Tommy said. "I wanted them to stop. Sometimes stopping one thing starts another," she answered. Marcus returned smelling of sun and exhaust and a road that knew his name. His shoulders carried something heavy and good. "They will stay through the night," he said. "A rotation. Bikes at every hour until you walk out." "Why?" Tommy asked, and his voice held more wonder than fear. "Because word travels fast on the road," Marcus said, "and sometimes it travels right. Outside, engines gave one unified rev that rolled through town like a forecast. Main Street windows opened. People stepped out of diners and barber shops and stood with hands at their sides, faces tipped to the sound. The same town that had once turned its face away now had to look. Tommy watched light play along the metal rail, small quivers of brightness like fish under water. He could not see faces, but he felt presence like warmth on skin. "They really came," he whispered. "They always do. Once someone lights the flare," Marcus said. The nurse smiled despite herself. "Looks like you have a crowd," she said. "Half the internet is talking about you." Tommy let out a thin laugh that hurt, and still felt worth it. "I guess I am not invisible anymore." "No," Marcus said, voice steady as the engines beyond the glass. You are seen, and we will make sure the world keeps looking. The roar rose again and rolled over the town. Not rebellion, but recognition. Tommy lay back, and the sound moved through him until it became something more than noise, something shaped and deliberate. The engine spoke the truth. The way the camera had recorded it, and paper had stamped it, and people now carried it in their chests. He whispered the words that had started his part of it. Small and plain and strong enough to travel through glass. Somebody had to. Outside. 1,000 engines answered. The noise outside softened to a steady hush, a tide holding its breath at the shoreline. Inside, the room kept its small music. Monitors pulsed their green steps. A cuff sighed and released. The clean smell of antiseptic held like a rule under it all. The air felt watched, as if the walls themselves had turned to face the door. The deputy came back with a face that had practiced calm, and a folder that knew its job. The social worker followed, notebook open to a waiting page. A hospital administrator slipped in behind them, carrying worry the way anxious people carry clipboards. Mike stood with his cap in his hand. Marcus took one quiet step closer to the bed and stopped, not to block, only to stand within reach. We should take your statement, the deputy said, voice low, careful of stitches and breath. The sooner we do, the less the mind will sand the edges. He did not sit, he did not crowd. He left the space between a question and an order and waited inside it. Tommy listened to the machines count what his body was doing without him. He felt the rap at his ribs, the honest ache of the wrist, now splinted, and waiting for sleep and pins. Memory had already begun its work, shifting the lot into a map of shadows and noise. He tasted the dry metallic edge that came before fear had a name. The thought of going back hurt, but the thought of leaving it unspoken hurt worse. Okay, he said, and the word leaned forward rather than back. There is a consultation room down the hall, the social worker said. There is a screen if you want it, or we can keep it dark and only talk. Your choice. If I have to remember, he said, I want the truth to sit with me while I do it. Marcus nodded once. A small door opening. Mike pulled his cap down and let out a breath as if he had been holding one for someone else. They moved without hurry, because the floor did not allow it. A transport aide slid a wheelchair into the light and spread a warm blanket over its arms. The elevator chimed its gentle bell and the doors parted. In the corridor, the air felt like slippers and kept its voice. The rumble outside carried through the walls, a low palm on plaster, unthreatening and sure. The consultation room was the color of paper left in a drawer too long. A table stood in the middle, the kind that had seen hard conversations and learned not to complain. Someone had rolled a monitor on a metal stand to the far end. Beside it, a small black player rested on a square of tape. On the table, a clear evidence bag held a manila envelope. Tamper tape sealed its mouth in a neat red cross. A white label showed a name and a time written in careful block letters by a hand that had wanted not to shake. Chain of custody, the deputy said, almost under his breath. He placed his fingers on the bag with the back of his knuckles, a touch that would not smudge. He read the label aloud, name and day and hour, each letter a small anchor. Paper is one kind of courage, he added. Not exactly to anyone and still to everyone. The administrator stood near the wall and tried to become part of it. The social worker sat and uncapped her pen but did not make it move. Marcus remained standing, arms loose, attention steady. Mike found a place to lean where the paint had been mended and did not mind. The deputy peeled a corner of the tape with slow patience until adhesive sighed. He opened the bag, eased the envelope onto a clean sheet, and shook the drive into his palm. So little, he said, and not as a joke. He set it into the player. The monitor woke with a field of blue. Only when Tommy nodded did the deputy press play. The lot appeared in grainy afternoon, asphalt and long shadows and pumps that waited like patient soldiers. The timestamp marched in the corner, small white numbers that refused to lie. The glass door reflected sky, and someone moving behind a counter. A motorcycle rolled into frame and came to rest. Leather and chrome made ordinary by distance. Tommy felt the hum of that moment ring his bones, present answering past in a language without words. He watched the circle form, men sliding into place with loose, casual cruelty. He watched a broad hand flatten against a rider's vest. A touch meant to claim what did not belong to it. He watched Dale turn his chin up the way men do when they need an audience for their worst parts. The camera did not hurry. It took everything in, even things nobody meant to show. Pause, Marcus said quietly, and the deputy held the scene. Marcus leaned a fraction closer, not to fix anything, only to look at it long enough that it would never be able to deny itself. His fingers rested on the table, two knuckles against laminated wood like a second stamp. "Play," he said. The boy came out of shadow, small and stubborn, as thin as a promise, and exactly that strong. Tommy felt heat run up his neck and into his face, not pride and not shame, a hard blend that tasted like truth. He watched the first punch tear the air and miss. He watched the second land. He watched his own body fold and reach and try. And then he heard again the clean, wet pop of bone that had not been meant to carry such a moment. Boots thudded, gravel hissed. The room flinched once, and learned to keep looking. Sirens slid into the corner of the frame. Color first, then light, then the language of help. The truck fishtailed away, and dust tried to pretend nothing had happened. The rider dropped to his knees beside a small body that had chosen to be there, and leaned in to catch the words the camera could not hold. "Stop," Tommy said softly. The deputy paused. The image froze with dust in the air, and a hand reaching and a heel lifted to run. Tommy set his good palm on his thigh and waited until he could feel bone and blanket and the small fact of being here. He let his breath fall out slow and steady. The taste of copper stayed behind his teeth only as a memory now. He lifted his chin without thinking about it. "Go on," he said. They watched the ambulance pull in, doors flower open. Men and women do their practice steps with a speed that never looked like panic. They watched Mike run out into the light and stand there like a man learning a new kind of help as he moved. They watched the stretcher lift and slide and the doors close. The picture steadied into an empty lot again, only long shadows and nothing to see, as if pavement could lie for anyone who asked. The deputy stopped the recording and let the screen fall to blue. He took the drive out with a small polite click and fed it back into paper and then into the clear bag. He smoothed the tamper tape with his thumb until the seal looked like certainty. He added a second strip and wrote his initials over the seam. A small stamp came out of his pocket and bit the form with a firm sound. The thud carried the shape of a promise. "We have enough to move," he said. "We will take your statement now and add it to the record. The footage goes to evidence, and then to the county attorney. I will keep you updated. I should say their names," Tommy said, a thought that had been waiting behind his teeth. "In case anybody decides to forget later. If you are ready," the social worker said. He spoke the names out loud. He did not spit them or bless them. He put them where they belonged, one after the other, like setting stones in a row so a path can be found again. The deputy wrote each letter with square patience and read them back. So sound and ink matched. He asked two quiet questions, not to test but to complete the shape. Then he set his pen down and looked up. "You do not have to sign today," he said, glancing at the bandages. "We can attach your words to the report and return with papers when you are stronger." "Will it matter?" Tommy asked, and he did not ask like a challenge. He asked like a boy, measuring the weight of a world he might have to carry. "It matters," the deputy said. "We have faces and time that does not lie. We have what the machine saw, and what you said, and what this community can no longer pretend not to know. The county is watching, and if the county forgets, the camera remembers." He seemed surprised at his own certainty, and let it stand. Marcus stood by the door with his hands together, in a way that could have been prayer or patience. From the inside pocket of his vest, he drew a worn plastic sleeve and turned it so the light could touch the face inside. "My son," he said. "He would be your age now. He was the same age when I lost him." He did not hand the photo over. He let Tommy see, and kept it steady in his own fingers, as if sharing did not require giving it away. "That day on the lot I did not see you, and then I did. I am not going to leave. I will not put weight on you that is not yours. I only wanted you to know what holds me here." Tommy looked at the boy in the picture, and at the marks on Marcus's knuckles, and at the calm he wore like a tool on his belt. The engines outside pressed their palm to the wall again, and the room answered with a quiet breath. Something turned over in him, not a loud thing, a small, hard engine finding spark. "Okay," he said, and in that single word lived a promise to stop stepping back from the people trying to step closer. They wheeled him slowly back to his room. The elevator's bell chimed like a soft yes. The corridor accepted the chair and gave it space. As the door swung open, the engines outside lifted once, one big breath of witness greeting a boy who had told the truth. The nurse eased the blanket, tucking without trapping, and set the cup with the bendy straw, where his hand could find it without searching. The deputy paused in the doorway. "I will be back," he said, "with updates you deserve and forms you can ignore until you cannot." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for stepping out, son." He did not wait for reply. He left the thanks behind like a coin on a stone. When the door closed, the room settled into its measured rhythm. The monitor drew patient green hills. The cuff breathed and rested. The medicine smoothed the harshness, but left the center of things intact. Tommy turned his wrist and read his name on the band, felt the stamped hour in the thin gray print, and pictured the red blink above the pumps, the blue stamp on the pink slip, the sealed bag kneeling in a locker under light. He saw a line running through all of it, a thread that pulled and did not break. Marcus sat again with the discipline of a man who understands that sitting can be a kind of work. Mike adjusted the blind another inch and let a strip of sky settle across the rail like a ribbon. No one told him to rest. No one told him to be brave. The room allowed him to be a boy who had done a hard thing and did not need to name it twice. He did not think the word justice. He did not think the word revenge. He let the soft thud of the stamp live in him, a sound like a gavel, learning how to keep its own promises. The nurse checked a line and smiled the other smile, the one people use when recognition replaces pity. "You did good work," she said. "I only told the truth." He answered, "That is the hardest work," she said. And outside the engines agreed in their low, steady way. A weather that had chosen a side, afternoon thinned to the pale shade of paper, and held there as if the day did not trust itself to move. Inside the room, the small music of machines kept time. A monitor climbed and fell in green steps. An automated cuff breathed and let go. The air kept its clean hospital smell, a mix of soap and plastic, and something colder that pretended to be comfort. Beyond the glass, the engines did their own steady work, idling in formation, a low patience that pressed through the walls. Without asking, word moved along the corridor. The way heat moves along the length of a pipe, nurses carried it in their voices without noticing. Volunteers slowed their carts near the door and then sped up as if they had forgotten to be casual. From the desk, a television whispered the new name of a boy. To rooms full of strangers, laughter rose once, fast and thin, and then stopped with the soft click of a receiver set down with more care than usual. Marcus kept the chair as if stillness were a job. He checked his phone without unlocking it, a habit that looked like discipline, and Mike drifted between window and sink and door and invented chores that gave his hands something to believe in. Tommy lay quiet and learned the shape of being seen when nothing big was happening. That shape had weight. It settled across his ribs and waited for breath to move underneath. The deputy came back in the late afternoon with sharper lines at his eyes and a folder that did not wobble in his hand. He put a folded paper on the tray and spoke in the careful voice people use around bruises. "The county attorney is filing," he said, "charges for assault and battery. There may be more once the doctors finish with their reports." He did not look away while he said it. He let the simple words do the heavy work. Tommy nodded. The tape at his ribs tugged at his skin the way consequence tugs at truth. He thought of the red blink above the pump and the gray print on the wristband and the stamp that had landed like a small hammer telling paper to behave. He wanted to ask what now and did not, because the engines outside had already begun to answer. "There is reaction," the deputy added, choosing a word that kept a gate closed on worse ones. "Calls to dispatch. Some folks grateful and loud about it. Some folks angry and saving their noise for later. We are increasing patrols around the hospital and the station." He did not speak the name of the family that had made a habit of harm. He did not need to. "Will they come here?" Tommy asked, not because he wanted drama, but because he had learned not to pretend that anger sleeps. The deputy glanced once at Marcus and came back to the boy. "Not tonight," he said. "Not through that wall of engine. But men who have been seen do not always take to sleep kindly." The warning sat on the tray beside the paper, a tool anyone could pick up if they wanted a steady hand. When the deputy left, the door made the soft latch of kindness. The hush returned, and the light slid along the bed rail like water. Outside, the low idle of bikes settled into the room and made a second pulse under the first, a promise layered beneath a promise. A nurse came with evening medicines and the other smile, the one that recognizes rather than pities. She lifted the blind, the width of a finger. Through the slit, Tommy saw a chrome shoulder and row of helmets at rest, like heads bowed for prayer. Flags snapped once and draped again. A man in denim cradled a paper cup with both hands, as if warmth needed help crossing leather. The sight picked up Tommy's breath and set it down whole. He rested, because the body will make a bargain with a mind that wants to keep watch. When he woke, day had shifted its voice. The white of the room had cooled by a small degree. Bulbs along the hall had brightened as if on cue. The engines had deepened into a slower register, less arrival and more weather. Dinner arrived, more a color than a taste, and he ate the parts that did not argue. Mike carried the tray away and brought water with the straw bent into a question already answered. Marcus lifted the blind, another breath. Lamps lit the lot in soft gold that turned leather into matte shadow. Men spoke in small knots with hands and quiet heads. The front circle held its emptiness like a stage. The chair sat at the center. The folded vest waited, a line of thread catching lamplight. The social worker returned without a pen, which felt like a kindness. She had traded one sweater for another. She stood at the foot of the bed and told the truth in simple steps. "The doctor wants to discharge you tomorrow if your numbers behave. Noon, perhaps. A short conversation with the county in the morning. No surprises. You can say later if later feels like the right word." She watched his face for the flinch and found something steadier instead. "I will try," Tommy said, "if the floor agrees." "It will," Marcus said, his voice carrying the patience of miles already traveled. Night settled like a blanket smoothed by a careful hand. Feet in the hall softened. A volunteer rolled a cart stacked with folded blue and hummed a tune without words that held the air in place. The elevator bell chimed now and then, polite as always. From somewhere in the town, a radio threw a few broken pieces of argument against the brick, and wind gathered them away. Tommy heard one bright shard about who belongs, and let it go, because letting go was sometimes heavier than holding on. Mike's phone buzzed. He read and tried to hide a smile and failed. "Some folks want to bring sandwiches and coffee," he said. "I told them yes until we drown." He looked faintly ashamed at feeling proud of a town that had not seen a boy sleeping behind his dumpster. Tommy did not make that shame heavier. You can still love a place and ask it to be better. He had learned that sentence in a hard school. A small knock. Then the deputy again with a cardboard box that had once held files and now held letters. He set it on the counter as if setting a loaf where it could be shared. People sent notes. He said, "Some for the writers, some for you." We screened out nonsense. Good ones made it through. Read if you like. Throw them at the wall if that helps more. His face had the look of a man surprised by hope, but keeping his hands steady anyway. He added a line of facts because facts deserved the same respect. The family did not answer calls. Their lawyer did. Warrants in the morning. The sheriff asked churches to keep doors open tonight. One pastor said the engines were loud enough prayer for now. The deputy wore his surprise like a tie and left before the room could make a joke of it. Marcus picked up one envelope with wide, careful handwriting, turned it once, and set it back unopened. Later, he said, the word meaning, "when the boy can hold it without tipping." Night leaned further in. Men outside traded places with the ease of people who know where they stand. A grill lit on the far edge of the lot, and the thin ribbon of meat and smoke came and went through the window seam, mixing with antiseptic into an odd perfume of work and home. Tommy closed his eyes for longer stretches and woke without falling. The room was the same room. The engines were the same engines. His chest learned to ride both sounds without arguing. In the thin hour before dawn, Marcus stood at the window like a quiet guard and asked without looking away if the boy was sleeping. "Enough," Tommy said. He reached for water and found the straw by memory. He swallowed and did not wince. Dawn came like good news that refuses to shout. The white of the ceiling warmed. The nurses changed places with other nurses in a dance that missed nothing. A doctor slid in and listened to numbers and ribs, and the space under the bruises where pain liked to hide. "If pressure holds, we walk a little after breakfast," he said. "See how the world behaves under your feet." He left his careful optimism sitting on the edge of the bed like a folded towel. Outside, the engines picked up a breath of energy, not louder, only more certain. Flags shook and laid down again. Leather creaked as men stretched. The empty chair held the front like a word waiting for its sentence. Mike found a razor in a drawer, studied it as if it needed a license, and put it back. "You look fine," he said. "Scuffed is honest on a day like this?" The social worker came back with the same shoes and a new patience which looked a lot like the old patient's. She named the steps without turning them into orders. "Sit. Breathe. Stand if the room refuses to spin. If it tilts, we sit again and call that a victory." The nurse raised the head of the bed. A careful measure. The sheet rustled. Payne tugged once, and then agreed to stay in the line. Tommy swung his legs to the edge and placed both soles on the floor. It felt like touching the truth, cold and level and not interested in opinion. "Take your time," Marcus said. His voice carried the steady weight of distance converted into a promise. Tommy pressed down through heel and arch. He lifted an inch, then another, and then stood, The room did not slide. The cuffs sighed and recovered. The monitor minded its bright business. He breathed, and the hurt did not get to be the only thing in the room. Good, the nurse said. That is the shape of walking. We repeat the shape after food. Noon is not a cliff. The social worker said softly. It is a door. We only open it if the hinges say yes. He sat again and let the small burn of muscles waking mean something good. Breakfast arrived. Pale eggs and toast halfway to coal and still useful. He ate enough to satisfy the nurse and drank water until the straw clicked empty with the small sound of a job done. The deputy stepped into the doorway with a nod that felt like a salute. The county is ready, he said. The road is ready, Mike said from the window. Easing the blind up another finger's width, the engines outside lifted once. One note tuned and held. It came through glass and paint and skin. It found the place where fear and courage share a border and told it to stand a little straighter. Tommy set his palm on the rail and felt the metal cool and exact. He looked at Marcus and found him already looking back, mouth a steady line. The outline of a photo, a quiet square under leather, where a heart keeps a different kind of time. Tommy nodded. He did not say he was ready. He did not know if ready was the word. He let the engines say it for him. He let the town hear it and decide what it wanted to be next. He let the hour step toward him. And for the first time since the lot, he stepped to meet it halfway. By late morning, the light in the room warmed from pale winter to a quieter gold, the kind that promises noon without hurrying it. The nurse checked his numbers and smiled without speaking. The social worker held a clipboard, the way people hold a book they might reread, gentle and sure. Marcus rose from the chair and set his knuckles on the rail as if testing a bridge he trusted. Ready to try again? The nurse asked, voice steady and kind. We stop the moment your body says stop. Tommy slid his legs over the edge. The floor met him cool and exact. He pressed down through heel and arch and rose. The room stayed still, the way a promise stays still when you touch it. Breath found its lane. One step to the door. Another. The cast tugged at his balance and then behaved. The band at his wrist warmed under the light. He looked at Marcus. Take your time, Marcus said, the patience of miles softening each word. They gathered at the threshold in a small knot that knew when not to speak. The social worker nodded to the aide with the wheelchair. Then to Tommy. Your choice, she said. Sit for the ride, or walk until walking says enough. Walk, Tommy said. He felt the shape of the word in his mouth, square and steady. The elevator chimed once. Policia Zaver. The doors opened like a held breath. Coffee and disinfectant and linen that had known heat braided the air. Footsteps slowed behind them as they moved. A volunteer pressed the call button again, though the car already waited, as if blessing the choice with a second ring. They reached the lobby. The nurse scanned his wristband. The scanner beeped and printed a time that would matter later to people who cared about times. Two glass doors sat waiting, thick and clean, reflecting light and small moving shapes. A guard pressed the bar, and the first door folded out. Air shifted. A thread of exhaust slid in. Not sour, just honest. He heard them before he saw them. Engines. Yes, but not the hungry bite from the lot. This was a held note, softer and larger together. 1,000 throats in one key. He felt it in the wrap at his ribs, and in bones that had been asked for more than their share. Someone in the lobby whispered his name and stopped, as if afraid to claim it. The second door opened. Light poured in. Marcus stepped aside and let the boy go first. Outside, the hospital steps fell to a parking lot that had become its own small country. Motorcycles filled every stripe and shoulder and curve of drive, arranged with a care that felt like ceremony. At the front, a wide ring had been cleared. In the center waited the chair he had seen from above, empty but for a folded vest. A flag lifted and fell on a portable pole braced in sand. A plywood platform rose to a working height with a microphone waiting. Speakers murmured once and held their breath. For a heartbeat there was only air and the hush of cooling tires. Then one engine turned over and died. Acque. Another followed. Then none. Silence filled, and could have been drunk. Faces turned toward him, leather and weather and square jaws, hands loose at sides. He saw Mike near the ring, cap in both hands, mouth caught between grief and joy. He saw the deputy with radio lowered and shoulders squared. He saw the sheriff hold his hat to his chest and pretend not to wipe his face. Marcus walked at his shoulder without touching. The social worker and the nurse stopped at the top step. The aide rolled the chair behind them and waited without insistence. He could have sat. He did not. The first foot on asphalt landed like a signature. A ripple moved through the ring, not a cheer but a shared breath. A crowd that knew how to carry weight together. At the platform, Marcus offered a hand for the steps. Tommy took it for the first two and let go for the last. Marcus faced the crowd. The microphone caught his voice and gave it back the way a valley gives back thunder. "Thank you for standing," he said. He did not shout. The words reached anyway. "We came for a boy who did what men should do. We stand where one person stood alone, so no one has to do that again if we can help it." He gestured to the chair and lifted the vest. He held it high so patches faced the people. Thread caught light. A small square photo sat pinned above the heart. He did not say the name. He set the vest down and turned to Tommy. "The first time," he said, "you stood for me. Now I stand with you." He stepped back. Steele took the microphone, broad and sure, beard threaded with silver, a way of standing that asked no permission. His voice came like a river that had chosen its banks. "Your bills are covered," he said. "Every scan, every stitch, every pill." He lifted an envelope and handed it to Marcus, who handed it to Mike, who held it the way men hold new life. "There is more," Steele said. He pointed to a table where a thin man in a suit stood with a folder. "A trust has been formed. School if you want it. Trade if you want it. Time to decide. Paid for." He did not say a number. The size lived in the air without figures. A couple stepped forward. The woman wore a plain sweater and the eyes of someone who understands classrooms. The man's hands knew rope and saddle and wrench. They climbed carefully. The woman held a small album. She knelt without thinking what kneeling might look like. "My name is Carol," she said. "This is Jim. We have a room for you if you want it. A bed," she added, as if the word mattered more than furniture. "A window. A desk." She opened the album, a quilt of blues and greens, a poster of a road running under a wide sky, a closet with 2 shirts on hangers and 1 empty hanger waiting. Tommy stared until the colors tightened into a knot he recognized. Want rose and stood where fear usually stood. Jim spoke like a man who respects the shape of a promise. "Horses in the field," he said. "A workshop if you like noise. No one lays a hand on you unless you hand them a wrench." The last line was not a joke. People laughed anyway, and then heard themselves and quieted. Tommy swallowed, and his ribs tugged. He had practiced thanking for sandwiches and day-old coffee and silence. He did not have a word for this. He looked at Marcus. Marcus gave one small nod, not to tell him what to do, only to say the choice would not break him. Tommy turned back to Carol and Jim and nodded. It was small and enough. Carol's face softened into sudden youth. Another man stepped up, lean, oil under the nails, hair clipped tight. "Jack," he said, "I run a shop down the highway. When the doctor clears you, there is work. I will not let you hurt yourself on my floor. I will let you learn He held out a pair of mechanic gloves tucked together like small sleeping animals. Tommy did not take them yet. He was learning to carry one thing at a time. Marcus lifted the microphone again. "Not speeches," he said, and the crowd eased. "Just this." He raised the vest. "Not our colors. Not that. Different." He turned it so Tommy could see. Leather softer than it looked. On the front, a small patch over the heart embroidered with a single word, "Brother." On the back, a name stitched in level letters, the letters on his wrist, the letters the nurse had scanned, the letters the deputy had read into paper. "May I?" Marcus asked. Tommy nodded. Marcus stepped close and settled the vest with careful hand. Leather cooled cotton and warmed a breath later. The weight was not heavy. It was exact. Marcus lowered his voice until the microphone barely caught it. "I lost a son," he said. "I think he sent me you." For a moment the world narrowed to leather and air and a hand on his shoulder. Sound stepped back. Even pain took a step. He did not hold tears because holding would have hurt more than letting them fall. One clung to his jaw and fell to the vest and made a dark spot that soaked and vanished. When he looked up, the ring had shifted closer without breaking. Hands rose not as fists but as open palms. A welcome. Mike let out a sound, half laugh and half cry. The deputy stood straighter. The sheriff looked at the sky and wiped his eyes like a man with wind. Steele pointed to a table with white envelopes and a box for letters. "For the boy," he said. "For later." He tipped his head toward Marcus. "For the man who stayed." Stillness held the platform long enough for the words to root. Someone started a chant and stopped after one word. An engine turned over once, then another, not to move but to agree. The sound rose and settled like a vow. A child near the barricade waved a small flag and dropped it, and picked it up again because his mother lifted his hand. Tommy's chest hurt with everything, and still he felt larger inside than before. He stepped to the microphone without a plan. It sat heavy, a little unbalanced. The crowd waited without impatience. "Thank you," he said. Two small, exact words. He swallowed and tried again. "I did not know anyone could see me. Now you do." He stopped before words could run away with him. He stepped back, and the air eased. At the far edge of the lot, reporters cleared their throats around questions. The deputy lifted a hand, and their throats closed from habit. A single car edged too near the tape. A sheriff cruiser rolled forward a yard, and the car reconsidered and backed off. The engines did not change their note. Mike climbed the platform last, hands on the envelope. He held the mic too close, so it popped. Flinched. Tried again. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the boy. "I left sandwiches," he said. "Rough. I should have left a door. I am sorry it took someone else to show me how." He drew a breath and squared his shoulders. "My back door stays open." Policy and confession in one sentence. Heads nodded. The nurse at the steps nodded without smiling. The social worker stood with the aide on the first riser, papers hugged to her chest the way you hold a book you love. Noon had come and gone, and no one checked a clock. Marcus leaned close. "You can sit now," he said, and the chair waited. Tommy shook his head. His legs had asked for this, and he wanted to give it. He looked past the ring of leather and chrome to the town that had pretended not to know him, and saw checkout faces, and sidewalk faces, and faces from the edge of the lot. Some looked away. Most did not. He did not decide what to make of that yet. He did not have to. Steele lifted the mic once more. "We ride easy," he said. "We make space. We keep watch. Anyone talking revenge did not hear why we came." He glanced at the sheriff and the deputy, and then at the sky. Men eased by degrees, as if someone had loosened a strap. Tommy touched the edge of the vest where thread met leather. Carol and Jim stepped off the platform and waited at the base like people waiting at a dock for a boat to kiss the pier. Jack stood by the steps with the gloves tucked under his belt. Marcus set a hand on the boy's shoulder and left it there long enough to be believed. "If you are ready," the social worker called gently. Tommy nodded. He took the first step down. The engines lifted a breath and held. He took the second. The vest creaked softly. On the third, he felt the tug of bandage and heat under tape, and still he smiled, the kind that starts in one corner and takes its time crossing a face. On the asphalt, Carol opened her hands and did not reach. He stepped into the space she made and stood almost close. "Welcome home," she said. The engines answered in one voice without moving an inch. In the end, Tommy's story isn't just about one boy who stood up. It's about what happens when silence finally breaks and truth steps into the light. Life has a way of testing us in quiet, lonely corners, and sometimes courage looks less like winning and more like refusing to walk away. This story reminds us that dignity doesn't depend on strength or status. It begins when we decide to do the right thing, even if our voice shakes. Real justice isn't loud. It's built in moments when ordinary people choose to see what others ignore, to reach out when it's easier to turn away. There's an old saying, "You can't keep a good man down." And it rings true here. The world may bruise you for standing up, but it's those scars that teach compassion, that prove your worth is not up for debate. Whether it's breaking free from toxic voices, standing against prejudice, or simply reminding someone they matter, every act of decency becomes part of a larger healing. Gold doesn't fear the fire. It's how we know it's real. If this story moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Tell us about a time you or someone you knew faced unfairness and found the strength to speak up. Hit like if this message resonates, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story that makes you think, feel, and maybe see the world a little differently. May your days ahead be quiet but strong, and may you always find peace in knowing that even in the darkest noise, your light still counts.